In this video, we're going to continue our work on factoring polynomials. And so far, we have talked about how to factor out a greatest common factor from the terms in a polynomial. And we've also talked about how to factor polynomials that have 4 terms. We used a method called grouping method. In this video, we're going to start our work with trinomials. So that means polynomials that have 3 terms. In particular, we're going to look at trinomials that are quadratic. So that means that they have an x squared. Their degree is 2. And we're going to look at quadratics that have this standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are numbers. In this video, a, our leading coefficient, will equal a 1. An example of these types of quadratics, you will see here in example number 1. Notice that we have 3 terms and that our leading coefficient a is 1. As a matter of fact, let's practice writing down what a, b, and c are. So in this case, a is 1, which is the leading coefficient of the x squared term. B is 7, which is the coefficient of the x term or the middle term here. And then c is our constant, which is 10. Now, when we're asked to factor any polynomial, again, I'm going to repeat myself, but you want to look at the original problem and make sure that you have factored out any original GCFs, any greatest common factors. And in this particular trinomial, the GCF is 1. But do train yourself to always look for that first. The second thing we will do as we're factoring polynomials is that we count the number of terms. So we know that there are 3, so this is a trinomial. We know that the leading coefficient is 1, and the method that we're going to use is that we are going to write down 2 sets of parentheses. Now, what we're doing, this process, this is us going backwards to finding the factors, the 2 binomials that we would FOIL to get x squared plus 7x plus 10. So we're going backwards on that. In these first 2 terms right here, we need 2 terms that multiply to x squared. And we know that's x times x. So that's what goes there. These 2 terms are going to be factors of our 10. So c is 10. And we're going to want 2 numbers that multiply. So factors of 10, 2 numbers that multiply to 10, but that add up to our middle term, to b. So the sum has to be 7. So 2 numbers that multiply to 10 and add up to 7, you know that's 2 and 5. They multiply to 10, they add up to 7. So we're going to end. Notice how our constant c is a positive 10 and our sum is positive 7. So we're going to multiply a positive 2 and a positive 5 to get our 10. Now let's check this. Okay, and how do we check that? Well, that's FOILing, isn't it? So notice that we would get x squared, and with our outers we would get 5x, and with our inside we would get 2x, and with our last we would get plus 10, and that these middle terms do indeed add up to the 7x. So you notice the process we did. We look for a greatest common factor, we count the number of terms, there's 3, the a is 1, we put our sets of parentheses, and then we're going to look for 2 numbers that multiply to c but add up to b, to the middle term. So look at number 2. Same idea here, right? Our greatest common factor of all 3 terms is still 1. This is a trinomial quadratic where a is 1, b is negative 7, and c is 10. We're going to then open up 2 sets of parentheses. We need 2 terms that multiply to x squared, so that's x and x. And now this time we're looking for our constant to be 10, so we need 2 numbers that multiply, product is c is 10, 2 numbers that multiply to 10 but that add up to a negative 7. So 2 numbers that multiply to a positive but add up to negative, those are 2 negative numbers, right? And so this time we're going to use negative 2 and negative 5. So back over here, in our parentheses we put a negative 2 and a negative 5. And again, if we go to FOIL this out, x times x is x squared. X times negative 5 is negative 5x. The insides give us negative 2x. And when we multiply the last, we get our positive 10. So we definitely have a good check there. And this is our factored form. In number 3, once again, we look at all 3 terms for a GCF, which is 1. Training ourselves. We have a quadratic again, 3 terms. Trinomial, a is 1. B is 3. C is negative 10. So we're going to open up those 2 sets of parentheses here. And because our first term is x squared, we know that x and x go here. And now we're going to look at this time two numbers that multiply. So the product is -10. That's our C. They have to multiply to a negative number, so we know that we have a positive times a negative this time around. And they have to add up to B. The sum has to be 3. Positive 3. So two numbers that multiply to -10 and add up to 3 are positive 5 and -2. So coming back to our parentheses, we're going to use a positive 5 and a -2. And again, checking by side. Here we have x times x is x squared. X times -2 is -2x. Our inners are plus 5x. And our last are -10. And our middle term is 3x. So everything checks out and we have our answer. Problem 4 is very similar to problem number 3 in that we've got a trinomial that looks exactly the same, except that this time our middle term is negative. So this time around we're looking for two numbers that are going to multiply to a -10 and they're going to add up to B to the middle coefficient, which is a -3. So this time around our negative has to come with the 5 and our 2 is positive. So we're going to write x minus 5 times x plus 2. So it's really important that you keep track of those signs because a lot of the errors that occur when factoring these trinomials have to do with those signs. So make sure that you are careful. Let's do a few more. Now let's look at number 5, and I'm actually going to have you take a try at this one. So I'm going to ask you to read through it, x squared plus 12x plus 27. Take a couple of minutes to write down what you think is the answer. Pause the video for a minute. Okay, so here's my answer. X plus 3 times x plus 9. How did you do? Again, we were looking for two numbers that multiplied to 27 and added up to 12, and that was 3 and 9. I bet you got that. Let's have you try number 6 next. X squared minus 16x plus 48. Pause, and when you unpause, the answer will be there. Okay, so we got x minus 12 times x minus 4. How did you do? Once again, we were looking for two numbers whose product was a positive 48, but that added to a negative 16, and the two numbers were -4 and -12. Now, a little tip for you. If you can't see that off the bat with 48, a good technique is to take the number you're trying to find the product of and make a little table of all the factors until you find some that match. So for example, I know that 1 and 48 multiply to 48. I also know 6 times 8, right? 6 and 8. I know 2 times 24. Okay, so see how we're just listing them. And just list them until you get it. Doing it in an order is good, but list them until you get the factors that you need. So I went 1, 2. The next one would be 3. So 3 goes into 48 16 times. Okay, so that's not going to work. And then I get to the 4. And at that point, I'll see that I have my 4 and my 12. And that does work. So making a little list of all the factors is a good technique if you can't see them right off the bat. If you're using your calculator, you could divide, right? 48, you divide 48 by these numbers that are in this first column here to get the numbers on that column there. Okay, so I hope that helps. Let's have you try a couple of more on your own before we do some different problems that I want to show you. Problem number 7 says x squared plus x minus 42. Notice that this time around, so once again, our GCF is 1, all three terms. We're training ourselves there. We know our A, leading coefficient, is 1. Notice that B is also 1 this time around, and that C is then -42. And I'm going to pause the video now, and I want you to find two numbers that multiply to a -42, but that add up to a +1, and then write your factored form. So pause your video. Okay, so two numbers that multiply to -42, we know we're going to have one positive, one negative. They have to add up to a +1. And so +7 and -6 are our two numbers. And this is my factor form. How did you do? Okay, one more for you to try on your own before I show you a new technique. Let's have you try number 8. So y squared minus 10y minus 24. Factor completely. Okay, pause and then unpause when you're ready. Okay, did you look for GCF and it's 1? Perfect. Did you write A is 1, B is -10, and C is -24? Yes. And did you then realize that you're going to need a positive and a negative number that multiply to -24 and add up to a -10? And this time I went ahead and made a little list here of all my factors of 24, looking for that 10, and I found it here in 2 and 12. And because our sum is negative, we know that the 12 has to be the negative number. So I have x minus 12 times x plus 2 as an answer. Does that match yours? I bet you're doing fine. Okay, this next one that I'm going to show you has a little added attraction. Let's take a look at this one together. Do you notice with number 9 what's different from the ones we've done before? If you're thinking my leading coefficient is negative, you are right. So we are going to do something with that. We are going to take out a GCF of -1. We're going to factor out a -1 first so that our leading coefficient is positive. So I'm going to write -1, open a parentheses, and then that's going to change all these signs, right? Because it's like we're dividing -1 into each one of these, and it changes all 3 signs. So now we're going to factor using our technique this trinomial, and then I want to make sure that you remember that that -1, it has to be part of your final answer, so don't lose it as you go through. Okay, and now we need 2 numbers that multiplied with -16, and they have to add up to our -6. And if you're saying -8 and +2, you're absolutely right. So we have -1 from before. We have our 2 sets of parentheses. Here's another heads up, by the way. Our variable has changed to m, so don't put an x here. Sometimes my students do that. They put an x there, and then they wonder why they're getting the problem marked wrong in the online homework tool. So you want to make sure that you use the right variable here. Okay, and so this is our final answer here. So again, the added step was that because our a was negative, we went ahead and factored out a -1 first. And that -1 changed all the signs of the terms. And then we factored and made sure that our -1 was part of our final answer. So I'm going to have you try 10. Take a look at 10. I'm going to have you try this one on your own. Pause, and then unpause when you're ready. Okay, did you get -1 times p plus 7 times p plus 4? Yes, I bet you did.